a lot of times, a lot of these smaller agencies don't even know this law exists. And it's not until somebody brings it to their attention of, oh, and by the way, you were supposed to have reported this to the AG's office, that they finally get around to making the report. But anyway, that's what that report is. Exists. And it's not until somebody brings
that's me trying to watch it on Facebook as well.
So everybody's glancing through it right now.
Okay. Could you give, I don't know that you were on live when you were first talking about the nature of the report. And for those that are listening, do you mind giving that background again?
Sure. It was, and I you know, my memory may be faulty about the exact timelines on this, but I believe it was back in the 1990s, maybe in the early 2000s, when there was an in custody death in the Sabine County Jail, Hemp Hill, Texas area, that did not get reported, and there was some sort of cover up. There were law enforcement officers that wound up going to getting criminally prosecuted over that scenario. And the legislature looked at that and some other incidents and basically created this database. They said, you know, they issued a directive that said law enforcement agencies that have in custody death shall report the circumstances surrounding those deaths to the Attorney General's office. And so that data has been getting collected now for 20 some odd years. And a few years ago, a few sessions ago, I believe it was in 2015, it may have been in 13, that somebody else came along and said, okay, what is being done with that data? And the answer was, it's simply sitting in a file somewhere. So a new set of instructions was made, instructing the AG's office to start tabulating the data and making it available to the general public, to the legislature, to members of the legislature. And so this is, as far as I can tell, the first true compilation of a multi-year period of the data that has actually been put together. And I don't have it open in front of me, but I believe it goes 15 through 19 is the data that they've got.
It's actually 2016 through 2019.
16. Yeah. Okay, 16 to 19.
Yeah, and the first two pages kind of give a good summary of the information that I was looking at. And the first thing I want to make note of is that this is available publicly. So this was interesting. Like some of this data that is being requested in reports is actually available. Maybe it's just a matter of making it more accessible, because you had to kind of dig for it. And I know that has been like some of the calls with respect from the Legislative Black Caucus and just other individuals with police reform asking for some of this information to be made available. So with this report, it actually was very thorough and gave me a lot of insight into some things to start some research. So it's just a matter, like I said, of it being accessible, because it was hard to find. But one of the things that I had noted, we had talked before about the ratio of police in certain large cities. And I think, Doug, that was a conversation that, you know, we had during our very first call. About the need for more policemen on the field. And one of the things that has been reported in the news, and I'm going to say in the news and just in general through articles, is that the crime level overall has actually decreased. And I know that you were saying that it depends on how you look at that, because when you look at the natural average based on what we're looking at here, what's the difference so that you can use this as a comparison?
Now, are you talking about the officer involved shooting, or are you talking about use of force in general?
I'm talking about the crime. So this report brought up the fact, in the article that accompanied this report that I saw, said that while the national crime level has went down, the number of officer involved shootings has went up. And so I find that interesting, per se, as to why would the use of force go up if there's less crime actually going on, right? Okay. And I think you were saying that it depends on what the report is looking at and how that information is collected.
Well, all officer involved shootings are basically collected the same, or they are now. They used to not be. Like Kevin said, used to reporting was very sporadic, and I lost y'all for some reason. But today it is different. Every officer involved shooting has to be put into the database and goes in. I think when you start looking at where these shootings are taking place, that's probably more telling than anything else, because it's always, for the most part, it's always in suburbs. I mean, not suburbs. It's in the cities, the larger cities, Chicago, Houston, New York, That's where you're going to have most of these shootings because it's more densely populated. You have more issues like that.
So would you say that the crime rate, would you agree with the assessment that the crime rate between 2016 and 2019 had overall went down in your analysis, or would you agree with that, or would you disagree?
I'm going to be honest here. I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
We've decriminalized a lot of things. Look at it. There's nobody goes to jail for marijuana anymore. Theft under $750 pretty much across the country is now not a crime. It's a cite and release. And that's across the board. There are tons of what used to be considered a crime that are no longer, they're cite and release. And that's going nationwide. So I believe the reporting is going to be skewed a little bit when you start looking at that. I know for Houston as an example, we may not have as many assault calls and theft calls and stuff like that, but people aren't reporting them like they used to either because they know nothing's going to happen to these guys. We have an epidemic here with breaking into motor vehicles, and you can't go anywhere in Houston and don't get your car broken into. It's just the way it is. But they arrest them and they're right back out on a $100 bond, and these guys will rack up 10, 12 bonds, $100 a piece. What do they care? They're just going to keep doing what they're doing. So
Doug, tell them how, if you guys, because you guys are doing exactly like we're doing it. If they break into one car or 30, it's one incident.
Correct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's the same for us too, is that, if you have multiple offenses that occur at the same time, the same type of offense is reported as one offense.
Well, Harris County does not stack charges. So they're going to take the highest charge and that's it. Everything. You may catch a guy with 3 different types of drugs, a gun, in a stolen car. They're going to take one charge. That's it. The highest charge is all they're going to take. The rest are just going to be swept to the side. So therefore, it looks like we've got one offense, but in reality, there were several.
Also point out last night in the debate, Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, he threw out a stat. He said that violent crime is actually up 15% over the last 4 years during the Trump administration nationwide. How accurate that is, I don't know. We've talked about this before. Statistics are statistics in the eye of the beholder. It just depends on how you look at it. We could go back and pull UCR reports, Uniform Crime Reporting, data from the FBI. And once again, it's all in a matter, you would have to look and say, okay, are we looking strictly at violent crime, and exactly how are we defining violent crime? Are we looking at overall crime rates? We're looking at property crime versus crimes against persons. It all depends on that. And so trying to draw any sort of conclusions or nexus, you will have to go back first and define all your terms.
So let me ask you this, just from your knowledge, and if we need to defer and maybe do some research, is there, because I don't believe that Texas keeps a report per se that breaks down the statistics with respect to the different types of crimes that have been committed. And so if they're lumping them all together, like you kind of said, then I can understand. Then they don't. Okay. Is there a way to keep track of that stuff?
Well, there's the Uniform Crime Reporting is, they are broken down into categories, and they're broken down into, like I was just talking about, you've got the violent, the property crime, and then there are subcategories under that, and that's standardized. And it's all those UCR reports, every law enforcement agency in Texas sends those to DPS, and DPS forwards them to the FBI or something along those lines. Maybe Clay could help us out with the actual, process that's there. So they are grouped together. But there's also a certain amount of subjectivity in there too, whether something is considered a burglary of a motor vehicle, sometimes depends upon the jurisdiction that you're in. There are still jurisdictions out there that, you stop somebody for DWI, but you filed on them for public intoxication, which is supposed to be happening, but it still happens in some places. So, even at that, there's always anomalies that come along.
Okay. So if we looked at this report that you guys have, it does back up with Doug, what you said, because it says more than half of all of the officer involved shootings have occurred in the heavily populated Texas counties like Harris, Bexar County, Dallas, Tarrant, and Travis. And so I think that all of you guys represent those areas. And so that's where, and I believe from the report that I read, they did say that crime had increased in each one of those cities. So while it might have decreased on the national average, it was increasing. In Dallas, for example, I did read a report on that. Fort Worth, it's not on here, but Fort Worth is, the crime has increased, as have officer involved shootings here. And then also some of the other things that they talked about were the total number of civilians that were shot during officer involved shootings. And the number of civilians that are killed in those shootings have steadily increased between 2016 and 2019. And so my question is, when you look at that statistic, that the total number of civilians shot during officer involved shootings have increased, and then it also has a fact that says the survival rates of the civilians who have been shot are decreasing. How do you kind of rectify those? It's interesting that the ones that have been involved in the officer involved shootings are from the data that's been calculated, those individuals have not made it, meaning that it's almost like a shoot to kill. Is there not, and I know we've talked about this before with use of force, are there not other ways that officers can be trained or are trained to try to subdue an individual before the shooting or the killing happens, especially since they're increasing?
Okay, I'm going to put it like this. You have to look at the totality of each situation, okay?
Okay.
There's someone with a weapon there, a gun of any sort. I'm not going to try to talk this guy down with a taser. You can't do that. You have to have the reasonable amount of force to
Force
deal with
matches force.
Correct. I mean, we're not paid to go out there and play patty cake with a guy that's got a rifle. We can't do that. We can't take that chance. I want to go home at the end of the night. And so do my counterparts over here. So each situation needs to be looked at separately. When you go into a report like this and it's only numbers, you can make numbers say whatever you want, okay? And just for this, we never shoot to kill. That's not how we train. We are shoot to stop a threat. Well, the only way to stop a threat is putting them on the ground. How do you do that? Center mass, the largest. We can't, it's not like the old West where you see on TV where you can just pull your 6-shooter out and shoot the gun out of the guy's hand. It doesn't work like that. I had a debate with a gentleman one time. He was trying to explain to me how he was proficiently trained in using a weapon, and that if somebody come into a business and he and his family are sitting there and they're going to come in and try to rob that business, why wouldn't you take action and step up and shoot that individual? And I tried to explain to him, obviously you can train all you want, but until you've got bullets flying at you, you don't know how you're going to react, because it's a different world. If I'm sitting in a restaurant, some guy comes in to rob the restaurant, I'm going to let him rob the restaurant. As long as he ain't shooting anybody in there, I'm going to let it go on. And then when he leaves, then I'll go out and deal with it. But I'm not going to do anything, because it's a different world when you have your family in there, or you're sitting in a position in which other people could get hurt. Our job is to hit center mass and stop the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible. Center mass there's a lot of vital organs in that center mass.
Yeah. Hey, and Nikki,
and weapons and rounds, rounds are made better today. I mean, the ballistics type things that they're putting out today are to stop the threat immediately, as quick as possible, and it's going to do as much damage as possible. It's just the reality of the situation.
Doug, before you do your question, can you clarify? Are you saying center mass? I'm just trying to make sure I understand the term. What does that mean?
Chest area.
Center mass, chest area.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry. I'm like, what does that mean?
And we've had this conversation many times. If we were training officers to kill, they'd all be headshots.
I get it. And I probably used the wrong phrase.
Killing somebody. Center mass is the best chance of stopping them.
Right. And I used the wrong phrase, but what I used was the term that everyone says, is that you're doing a shoot to kill. And when you look at that data, like, you're just trying to kill people. And I'm just trying to make sure that, we're presenting the information and just having a good discussion. So thank you for clarifying that.
One of your questions was about other, less than lethal or less force options. Law enforcement has been working on that forever. And those those options get more varied and with different, varying degrees of success over the years. I've been in the business for over 40 years now, and we've gone through the straight handle batons versus the side handle batons versus the expandable batons versus the stun guns, and then the tasers and the pepper spray and the beanbag rounds and the bullet, the rubber bullets. And so law enforcement is constantly experimenting with all kinds of less lethal or less than lethal options, trying to, find ways to mitigate the number of deaths that result from law enforcement contacts. So, like I say, some of them are more successful than others, and
Mhm.
but we, no matter what, they all look bad. There's no way of taking a snapshot of a police officer shooting somebody with anything that doesn't look bad, and so the obligation is to basically get the job done with the least amount of force that is necessary.
Right. And unfortunately, and I think we've had this conversation, the reason why this kind of gets put out there is because in the cases that we've seen and the ones that make the attention, you see a lot where they didn't have the force that was used did not appear to be reasonable based on the situation with the individual that was shot. And I mean, there are other cases that we could bring up, but we haven't had time to review, so I don't want to do that. But that's where you get that media attention and where you get a lot of the outcries, because you see these cases where someone maybe didn't have a gun or someone didn't necessarily have a weapon, and there's still some type of use of force there. And so those are the cases more so that I think are the ones that are making everyone, head swell, or like, what can we do to change this? Because that's where the problem is.
Yeah.
And I think Fred was going to say something.
Sorry.
Yeah, I had to, this is the first time what's up, buddy?
There he is.
Yeah. This is the first time I'm putting eyes on this report.
Okay.
That we got sent this morning, and I went through the most part of it, and we designed this. And when I say we designed it, I know I was part of it. So this is 245. This is HB 245. This is Eric Johnson's bill. And the portal is HB 275. That's 273. That's the portal we're designing. So the reason why we designed this or put this together, there was no reporting on this. All the information was gathered basically from the FBI, sent to each state. We couldn't get this information. So you're looking at the information right now in the 4 years from 16 to 20 or 19, whatever, maybe it's 3 years on here, of the information that's gathered as the first time of this ever being done. And in that range, and I'm reading the ending report on this.
Okay.
And you're seeing, the high levels of the shootings happening in the major cities. Well, that's common sense. That's where
Right.
Right. So, and another thing that this doesn't get to point out when you read the statistics on something like this is that crime has definitely changed. The dope houses and the criminals we used to chase back in the early 90s, that when many of us came on, they have completely changed. The access to weaponry has changed. I'll tell you an example. Last week, we went into a dope house to get a murder suspect, and he dropped an AK as we went through the door, and we were 5 feet apart. Now, he should have been shot, to be honest with you, but he dropped it, and he dropped it just in enough time for that reactionary gap to not hit him. And that when I say hit him, it's because he had 4 guns on him and he had 1. So when we went through the door, he dropped it. We were good enough to say he's done. He's given up his position. So does that always happen? Because sometimes they freeze. Well, he's going to get shot, and he's going to get shot with a rifle. We didn't carry rifles back then. When Doug and I came on, I know when Kevin used to ride the horse to work, I know he didn't have a rifle, or maybe it was a 45-70, maybe something like that. Him and Clay, but the rest of us
I had it on the side of the horse.
But most of us came out of the academy with a 9mm, and they said, go do your job. And we didn't have any other tools besides pepper spray. And and or a flashlight. And so now we've got all these discretionary tools that we can use for less than lethal 40mm tasers. And we carry all that. Our team carries that we do this work. We took down 2 murder suspects yesterday. The primary objective is to put the person down, get them to the ground. If you have a position where you don't need to shoot him, then the 40mm is coming in and it's going to hit him. And if that doesn't work, we're going to tase him. We've got levels of what our force goes through every situation, but the situations change. They change in a split second. And with the weaponry these guys are carrying these days, when I say these guys, the bad guys, our force has got to double their force. If they come with a gun, we come with 4 guns. And that's just the way law enforcement is, because we get in a lot of bad positions. You know, that position the guy put us in last week with the AK, you know, how many times do you think he answered that door with that AK? Probably every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was already wanted on a murder. And so you have that, but he put himself in that position. He did, not us. Our job is to bring him in. And so when I come back to this report and I'm reading it, and the numbers, like Doug said a while ago, the numbers always don't do it justice. This is the first time of it being reported. And guess who worked on this bill? Law enforcement.
Yep.
You know, who passed this bill? Law enforcement. I know Eric Johnson carried it, but we're the ones who created it. And we created it because we want people to actually see what we're doing. And the one thing I haven't found in here, and I'm just looking at on my phone, it's probably in here and it's 23 pages long, is that we wanted to put in this report is like, when we do get in a shooting, what was the weaponry that the person had? Did they have a gun? Did they have a knife? Did they have a bat? Did they have a spear? Whatever, bow and arrow, it doesn't matter. We want that in the report so we can show that this was part of the problem and why the person got shot. And when it comes down to shooting somebody or not, and I've been in 4, you get into a place where that's the last place you want to be. You try to get out of that place. Our de-escalation training has been so good for so long here in Dallas. I know not all the cities are doing that or training like that, but you will see that change. And you're probably going to see that in this session when you have a reform bill that comes out, because we will have a reform bill, and you're going to have it at mandatory de-escalation training across the state of Texas. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. And I know that Doug and Joe have harped on that in Houston. And I know that Kevin has harped on it in other areas in the state of Texas. It just needs to happen.
Fred,
So I was going to say,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, just to answer your question, Fred, I looked through the report and I didn't see the section that talks about what were the weapons involved. So that might be good data to put in here. I know that they have the deaths, the age, and they have the age of the individuals, which I thought was interesting. And there is the percentage of young, when you look at the age,
yep,
and you look at the younger ones, the majority of those are Black. Like the percentages show it's a high rate of young Black males. And so that brings me to the question of, and I'll let you guys finish your thought and then I'll take it to that next topic. But when you look at the age and you look at the areas and you look at the race, it brings me to some other questions that I have, which are, have been some of the complaints. Is there overrepresentation in certain areas, or is it the lack of education?
That's a word they use in this report. But you have to remember, if you go back and look at our murder rate that's here in Dallas, and I know the murder rate that's in Harris County, it's 80% Black on Black crime. And so when you say that, you're like, well, that's that problem. Well, it's not, because somebody has to go get them, right? And so when you send us to go get them and they don't want to be got, well, you've got several individuals with guns coming at each other. One who doesn't want to be taken in custody, and the ones that have to take him in custody. So because the person he kills lives matter, right? And so we've got to go get that person, and that person's carrying a gun or did the crime with a weapon most of the time. And so we never talk about that aspect, but that's the problem right there. If you didn't commit the crime, we wouldn't be coming after you. Exactly. And that, or you didn't do the robbery, you wouldn't have the charge. You didn't, and you got to look at all those charges all the way up from aggravated assault, the high level charges that usually become violent use of force. Mm-hmm. The use of force cases have increased over the years, but so has that same projected of the same people doing the same crimes. And a lot of times, like in Harris County, just like here, we have a revolving door with the same people committing the same crimes, especially violent crimes. They may do 30 of them in a year, but 2 of them may be the ones that they get pointed out on. So all those cases matter.
But when I look at, but figure 24, when I look at that one, and that is on page 20, where it talks about race demographics by incident, the cause, and it does list that, like you said, emergency, request for assistance, other traffic stop. There's a 33% of incidents for African Americans or Black people, which is higher than that of other races, and it's for the traffic stops, which is almost in line, which is more or than the hostage barricade situation, and also, and then also in line with the execution of a warrant. Like, it's like the percentages are so close. And so that's where I get concerned, is when I'm looking at something as simple as a traffic stop compared to, like you said, the scenarios that you talked about, because that's been one of the concerns. And one of the things that has been brought up is just, you know, with racial profiling, and just with in situations where, is there another way to, is this a situation where you need to be using force, you know, because it just says traffic stop. It doesn't give us more detail. So I don't know if it's a traffic stop connected, because they have a separate category for execution of a warrant. They also have an other category, which I'm not sure what's in that one, which is at 48%. And so I don't know if since you guys created this report, if you're familiar with what the other represents, that would be very helpful.
And like I said, this is the first time actually seeing it. And,
Okay.
and Kevin, I knew when we created it and put this together, but you know, when you do these things, like, or when you create something like this, or you help create it, or, you know, because everyone's going to take credit for it, right? And that's fine. You move on to the next one, right? You move on to the next one and the next, because we're constantly having to chase something in law enforcement. And on the traffic stops, and I know that I could probably speak for everybody here.
Fred, can I stop you for 1 second?
Yeah,
That's what I wanted to ask about. I didn't want to interrupt Nikki and her thoughts about this. I found it interesting, just like you said, that was the first time you put eyes on this. So then my next question is how many, because the intent is to go ahead and distribute information, be more transparent, hold accountable, and show the public what exactly is going on with folks when these incidents occur. You know, I think you're exactly right when it comes to weapons gained, what's going on with that, with the incident. Doug, I liked how you said with ratcheting up the charge, you know, looking at those people in charge of it. However, it's good to create a report. It's good to have information, but if it gets no traction and it's not out there, then it's just another thing that's on someone's shelf. So my question was, well, how widely distributed is this? How much traction is this going? Because I mean, that's the part where I'm like, okay, that's good, but no one's seeing this, and no one,
including us.
Yeah. And to add to what you're saying, Rudy, is this report, or is the intent of the law enforcement agencies that were in support of this report to take this data and take it back in house and say, hey, this is an area where we can improve? Because if we're not looking at this data that's being collected to kind of see where our trends are, what's happening, it's for nothing.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nikki. We need to meet. What we need to do is meet with the AG's office and have this easier to find. Go through the data reporting, why it was important to develop it, and to make sure that the public's able to see it. And I think that's the big thing here. It's, if we're just looking at it right now, and Kevin said he had to dig it out of there, which I don't like to hear things like that. And I know that our bureaucracy does that everyone knows that things get piled on top of each other and you just can't find it. I think it needs to be accessible very easily, even on citywide websites.
Agreed.
To where it can not only be one place, but multiple places. So you can look at your city's municipal, what's going on there, and then look at your statewide, what's going on there, to compare the two if you've got apples and oranges. So
you all can go on the DPS website, and it will give you the methodology of how DPS is collecting that data and reporting it. It's listed as Uniform Crime Reporting Program, but it's actually under the bullet of Crime Records Service, and that's dps.texas.gov.
Clay, can we put that? Is there a way to put that in the chat, or have some information out there? Because I was thinking something else, Fred. You just remind me of this. So one of the things that I really liked at Health and Human Services, when we developed a program regarding mental health and welfare and fitness for veterans, was that we got a request from the legislature to cross-reference that across all different state agencies. So if you need to find that information, here, this is right here. It's like, whoa, okay, well, I wasn't looking for it. That's interesting. It's right here. And then, also Google hits and everything else that helps that. I know.
I'd be happy to.
I know it's the African American Lawyer Section of the State Bar. I mean, that's something that, yeah, definitely we can host on our site. We can put something like that on our site. But I'm thinking even further, we have our groups across the state in Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston, and they can put it on their sites. And then, I mean, get that information out there because, like I said, there's a narrative that's out there. There's a narrative you're trying to hide the ball, trying to go do all these things with that. Well, you know what? Let's highlight what's actually been done. Because one, that means that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Two, we can go ahead and go through the process. Nikki and Fred's conversation back and forth was really interesting about what's in there, what's not in there, et cetera, how it's accessible. And then three, again, crazy concept. Just the reason why we're here today is that it shows that we're all working together to grind on commonality to try to go ahead and find solutions.
Well, it is hidden well. It's on a government website.
Of course.
Rudy, before
Funny
you
because it's
joined,
true.
Rudy, before you joined, we had talked about that because I know that this was some information or data that many have cried for. And when I say cried, that's been one of the contentions in the protests and just in general with transparency with law enforcement, especially on this type of data. And so when I found it, I was like, this is a lot of good information to use to kind of, have in your reports, or if you want to address, any kind of trends, but I didn't even know it existed. I lucked up on it when I was looking for something. And so, and I had sent it to, Stephen and Kevin just to get their input on it. But it does show that one of the items that we were actually including on our legislative proposal could be resolved with this. It's just a matter of what is done with the data, because it's one thing to collect it, but it's another thing to actually take the data and do something with it.
Yeah.
And so if it's just sitting out there just for transparency, I don't think that helps because it doesn't show why there's a trend. There's some sections on here that are not really clear. Like the other category is interesting here because you have 48.5% of incidents for African Americans in that other category, but it's not really clear what that other category represents. And so that would be interesting to know what that high incidence is, because it's the highest one. So I don't know.
But Nikki, keep in mind too, though, a lot of your departments, they're tracking this on their own and keeping track of their own data, even and watching that themselves and, adjusting things as need be on a local basis, not necessarily on the statewide numbers, but looking at their own local numbers.
No, that I agree. I have the reports from Fort Worth from 2000, and I think we have it from 2013 to 2019 for a presentation that we did with the mayor here. So I agree with you, but that report doesn't even really reflect some of the stuff that I'm seeing here. And that's been one of our issues, as well as this consistent reporting and what exactly is reported on there. Because in some of those reports in Fort Worth, they don't even account for the 6 officer shootings that happened in 2019. Like that information wasn't even on there. Use of force complaints, they showed 0. And so it was just some information that just did not seem accurate to me.
So Travis,
or accurate to a lot of people.
So Travis, maybe along those lines, because just like you said, I mean, law enforcement, there's statutory demands for them to keep specific information. Maybe if we look and see, I mean, this seems like best practice, what's in this specific report. I could be wrong. You guys can tell me what needs to improve. I'm sure everything can improve to an extent. And what do you think if that was what was required at the local level, even if it's, just like you said, they're not necessarily reporting to the state at times, but they're keeping it at the local level. So the reports are reflective. So when you look at the report, you know exactly what you're looking at and where to go and seeing, because it's analogous, if not the same format as what's going on at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there'd be an issue with some type of, having a overall map, if you want to say, on everyone being on the same page on how they're showing it or collecting it or whatnot. I don't think that would be an issue at all. Like I said, pretty much the majority of your cities anyway are having that, and they post it and it's available.
I think it's also important to take a look at the number of people shot every year in the state of Texas in these incidents. Because when you look at the number of stops or interactions between law enforcement and and civilians, it's very, very,
Very low.
very low. I mean, you're talking right at 100 every year. And how many contacts are there with citizens every year? I know in Houston, we have right around 2.2 million contacts with 4+ million people. So if you start looking at those incidents, we had what, 15 last year?
Yeah.
To me, that's incredible numbers as far as what you're talking about. And when you break those down to how many people were armed and how many people actually attacked our officers prior to being shot, you'll find that it's less than 1% of those that were even an issue, even a question.
And I have to agree with Doug on that. And because we look at that number constantly, and we don't only look at that number through our eyes, but we look at it through the national eyes. So we'll have 1.7 reasons for contact. That means traffic stops, that means calls, that's everything, right? In the city of Dallas. And you'll have a very minimal amount of individuals in a police shooting, right? Whether I didn't look at our numbers where we're at, but it's usually somewhere around 15, something like that. And so if you think about that and you go back and look at what happened, so and then you got to look at our population. So we're after this census, we'll be at 31 million. Well, we should be at 31 million for a state of Texas, and you have 80,000 cops. You have 80,000 cops protecting 31 million. I've said it a million times, and you've got a lot of crime when you have people that have moved into these urban areas that develop, and that's where the crime is. And you've got a pandemic going on. You got holidays coming up. The holiday season will be a very, very strong time for our robberies, and we know that. That's where our robberies take place. Robberies turn into murders, just so you know. When a drug dealer's out of dope, a drug dealer becomes a robber becomes a murderer, and that's what happens. And people don't like to hear that, but nobody in the communities are doing anything about that. And that's what really drives us crazy sitting on this side of the table, because I look at these mega churches being built. I look at all these fancy people making money on all this stuff. I see nothing put in these communities to help these folks that are getting killed and murdered. Nothing. And so when you go back and look at the murder rate and you look at all the other robbery rates, and they keep increasing, and they keep asking us to do more with it, right? Hey, go fix our problems. Go play basketball with our kids. Go out to the field. No, it's not. That's not our job. Our job is to go, when you call 911, it's supposed to go do it. Our job is whenever something happens or that a crime is committed is to solve the crime. That's not our job. We're not supposed to be dancing in the streets. We're not supposed to be making tacos with cops. I mean, that drives me crazy, because we keep asking for more, but that takes away more from us to actually do our jobs. And then folks want to know, why weren't you there? Where's my lawnmower? Where's my lawnmower?
So Fred, let me ask you
So
this.
let me say this. And I think over the weeks we have kind of, and again, I'm big on this for my profession, is a balancing test. And we want to make the inroads with the community and the police and the law enforcement agencies. Fred, I respect the fact that your job should be priority one. And then again, anything that's tangential or ancillary to that job, if it in fact is building up bridges with the community, absolutely. Because then it gets to the point where you have city councils shifting money that kind of almost align, Fred, to a certain extent, what you're talking about primary functions and responsibilities, and shifting those away so that you can kind of get to the foundational or fundamental practices of protecting and serving. Nonetheless, we have incidents because we probably said 3 or 4 weeks ago, consistently have law enforcement just be the folks that show up when something bad happens. So try to look at a way to say that shouldn't be the only time you see an officer, something, or a trooper or something to that effect. So I think there's a balancing test of what you want, Fred, and saying, let us do our job, of what I think communities would like to see, and have some familiarity of law enforcement. And then what I think, unfortunately, some city councils have done with their budgets that support what you say, Fred, get to just the basics of being law enforcement and not having,
I think
Steve
Steve
Steve, you
muted.
just went, you
We were
muted
losing
yourself.
He muted himself. But
Yeah, you
I'll
cut your thought off.
yeah,
that's kind of tough if you're looking at trying to figure out everything that is going on. Am I on mute? I don't think I'm on mute.
now you're back on.
Now
But
you're
I
back,
wanna-
but you
I want
were.
to
I'm
emphasize
sorry.
your-
Yeah.
I wanna
I'm sorry.
emphasize
I think somebody was trying to mess with our Zoom call. But that, so I think there's
No,
a
you just muted
balancing.
yourself.
there's a balancing, Fred, where I think, one thing I hope we can show is when the legislative process and people who are decision makers for law enforcement and people that are working within the statutes, us as attorneys, etc., recognize that you have to consider all sides of what this entails. You just can't look at it from the community. Just can't look at it from law enforcement. These two interact and intertwine and interplay in varying degrees each and every day. And as y'all said, things can change minute by minute. But you have to create a policy that's flexible enough, or policies that are flexible enough, that give not just the appearance of an overseer having oversight of a community and having a regular interaction. Because you asked the question, and it makes a lot of sense. Why do white citizens not feel the same way around law enforcement in general as, you may say, minority, brown, black citizens in the community? Possibly because of the relationship that you have or the familiarity between the groups. And I think, again, that brings on a balancing test to try to understand that, hey, we're not trying to, as Doug and Kevin and you and Clay have said, trying to injure the citizens. We're just trying to maintain order. And how do we do that? Well, it's more difficult if you don't know the population you're around. And that's why I think Doug, when he said he was out and doing and serving in the communities, he knew, though, folks that he was, interacting with, which gave him a much better result and outcome than not. I mean, that's a long-winded thing, but again, we have to balance what is purposeful and primary for law enforcement and what allows the citizens to feel comfortable in some groups with law enforcement.
And I'll just emphasize, Steve, I'll just take it further. You said if it's ancillary or not. No, it's not ancillary. They're not mutually exclusive. Fred is right that, hey, listen, people will complain, hey, where's my stuff? Where's my job? I needed you here. I was getting concerned with that. At the same time, they'll say, hey, listen, I mean, Officer Johnson was phenomenal. Officer Griffin was great. I know him because playing basketball with him, he stopped me when I was riding my bike to give me a ticket to go get an ice cream at Dairy Queen because I was wearing my helmet and wearing my pads and I was doing everything else the right way. Man, that is awesome. I know that person. I enjoy, getting to know him. And I think that the law enforcement, I think the people out there, they're here to serve us and they're here to work with us. And I think the hard part is, Fred, to your point, you said it was interesting. And I was going to ask you, I was going to push further on that question. You said 80,000 people, men and women, who are serving us, serve and protect for 31 million people in the state of Texas. So the question I have, because Doug, you brought this up months, even before we started this.
Guys, I have a hard stop at 11, so I'm going to drop off, but I enjoyed the conversation. See y'all next week.
Hey, see you, Nikki.
See ya. Go ahead,
Doug,
Rudy.
you brought that up months ago. I want to say back in whenever we first started talking to May or June, when you specifically talked about recruitment and trying to get people to join, the academies and work for there, and how there's a serious recruitment problem now. There's people who are just apprehensive, not coming, and everything else working from there. Maybe if we do, like what Steve was talking about, we have that umbrella, that pendulum, where people, hey, the people here community serving, working from there, people are working hard, busting up these drug dealers and everything else from there as well. We allow for that. But to allow for that, something that you guys have really emphasized to me, which makes it even further, is that that means we have to better fund law enforcement in what it's doing. And at the same time, go ahead and allow, we need to put some stops in these breaks early on so you guys never have to deal with these people. Because Fred, you put it best when you said that, what are we doing if these people are getting arrested, there's murders, everything else, we're putting these mega churches in, but what are we doing for these people? You're right. So Are we stopping, these people are drug abusers right there as well? What are we doing with people mental health illness? Are we putting funds over there regarding, your health care and your society and everything else as well? So you're not showing up to a situation where you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do? Because my job is to stop crime. My job is to go ahead and bring order. And if someone's doing this, this, and this, that's not my job. That's my role. But guess what? As society, as policymakers, we failed you guys. And it's like, well, guess what, Fred? That is your job, because guess what? We can't fix this. Merry Christmas.
Hey, Rudy, very well said. Let me give you my little 10 to 15 second rant here. I don't believe there's a police problem. I don't believe there's a race problem. I believe there's an economic problem. If you go to any low-income neighborhood, you're going to find minorities there, African-American, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. Every race is there, whites too. And until that's where 90% of our crime is coming from as well. It's coming from those low-income neighborhoods. You give them a proper education and a proper job, guess what they're not going to be doing? They're not going to be out committing crime. And until we invest in our infrastructure and get those young people in a decent school where they're not bullied, not threatened by gangbangers, and then you get them a good job when they leave there, guess what's going to happen? Those economic areas are going to come up. We are going to have better citizens. We are going to have better contacts with police. We're going to have a better everything. But until we get these lower income neighborhoods built up, nothing's going to change. And
Doug,
that's just my opinion.
Hey, Doug, it's funny that you said that, what you just said. I've heard that from plenty of times through the years. The barbershops. They said, I don't see anyone who's committing this crime who's got a 9-to-5 job and everything else from there as well. And it goes to training. If we're, and this is, not taking this too far from what we're doing, but as a council member, it's something I've been really enforcing, is that we've got to go ahead and redefine what higher ed is. Because if you're able to get these people in these trade schools, you get them to training where they're actually doing things, where they're making $50,000, $60,000 a year, something they can take care of right there without the load of college debt. It's the reason why we created a firefighters academy at our local high school. We're like, hey, we need more people who are going to be over here, who are going to be firefighters. Well, you know what? We have a really good high school. Why don't we create an academy with these seniors, give them the training, and then when they come out the next year, they can actually go ahead and get credentialed, and then they can be a part, and we can hire them to be part of the academy. There you go. And you don't have that burdensome debt and everything else that goes with it.
Rudy, if you really pay very close attention over the last 40 years, law enforcement has tried on any number of occasions and any number of different initiatives to get programs like that started. It cannot be law enforcement that makes it happen. No matter how many times we try, we're always going to come up short. Those things are going to happen within our communities, absent law enforcement, but it cannot be instead of law enforcement. This whole idea of reimagining, that's the cart in front of the horse. You cannot fund one at the detriment of the other. You have to do both at the same time until you can bring those crime rates down. You still got to have the enforcement section out there to take care of protecting our citizens against the criminal element. So they're going to, at least for the short term, and I don't know how long that short term is, you got to do both. And we have communities that have done a very good job of it. As you talk about here in Pflugerville, we've done a very good job of stuff like that, but it's almost always in the smaller, intermediate sized communities. It's almost never in our large metropolitan areas. Lee P. Brown was very big on community policing when he was the chief down there in Houston. He was pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, but they never put the resources toward it that have to happen. If you're going to make that kind of stuff happen, you can't have Dallas operating, 500 officers short. You can't have Houston operating 2,000 officers short. You got to fully staff in order to get all of those different services provided. Otherwise, law enforcement has to prioritize, and they got to deal with the emergencies first.
And that's where I'm going with it. And I know it seems harsh, but when we have officers and you've got pages of calls holding, and you've got a complete group of officers that are not answering those calls, and they're out there to serve community functions, and in one split second in a community function, we turn into the enemy again from a shooting. And so we've gone backwards, but we've spent thousands and thousands of hours on community support, and we didn't get it because we just didn't get the community support. So when we're short officers and we need this done, and we don't have the buy-in from the community, but we're watching other things getting developed, I know there's not an easy answer, and I know it's our job. I get that. We still do it. We've always still done it, but we're still operating short. And in communities like Pflugerville and communities like McKinney, the grassroots coffee with cops and stuff work much better because you do have a lot of downtime. You just do. You don't have the crime. So you're in the community.
You put the resources toward it because
you got the resources to work. Kevin hit it on the head there.
Happen.
And,
Yeah.
and another thing that we took away a long time ago that a lot of us talk about is that a beat responsibility officer. That has been taken away many years ago. And when that was taken away, the officer that worked that beat knew his community.
Fred, so Fred, can you answer, that's something that's wonderful. Can you explain why that was taken away?
We just ran out of resources, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Officers usually stayed in their beat and they took great pride. And if anything came into their beat, that nobody else came onto their beat. If that call was in 444's beat, then man, 444 better be answering it. Well, they don't do that no more. They don't do it anywhere anymore, I don't think. So
You're running all over the district now. You're
we're lucky enough at Irving to still be able to do that as of now.
Oh, y'all still do it? Yeah, we do not do that in Dallas. And I know they don't do it in Houston.
We have numbers that coincide with what beat we're supposed to be in.
Yeah.
But you're district wide. You're going wherever they need you because the calls are just there's so many you can't keep up with just having one unit in a beat.
There was a study was done years ago. I think it was Department of Justice and the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where they said that ideally in law enforcement, especially in local law enforcement, ideally an officer should spend somewhere between 20 and 25% of their total hours responding to calls for service. And the other 70 to 80% of their time should be spent on proactive patrols. That would be the ideal circumstance. If you look at Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, what you're going to find is these officers are spending 90%, north of 90% of their time running from call to call to call, and then doing all the paperwork and everything else that has to go with all those calls. And there's very, very little time going toward proactive patrols.
So Kevin, let me ask you this. This might be a hard question. I guess I'm asking from a council standpoint too as well. So I know most of our budgets, most cities, 45 to 50% of our budgets, the police department. That's what it is. First responders, what's happening with that.
Typically, 2/3 of a city budget is public safety, police.
Yeah, public safety in general. Yeah, but I'd say law enforcement probably, just police department probably close to 50 or so. So let me ask you this: our population, and this is, I keep going back to what Fred is saying, and what they used to do back in the day with beats. So have cities just gone? Even though the population has expanded and exploded, they just haven't kept up with law enforcement aggregate to that specific population, or three things, three-way. You tell me which one's right. Keeping up with that population, one, or have they went ahead and they've had law enforcement in place, but they've been cutting the budget of law enforcement, therefore what law enforcement can do, two, or three, that even though our population has expanded, that people are willing to be the men and women who are serving and protecting us in law enforcement, comparable to what's happened with the military, has gotten smaller. And consequently, you have 80,000 men and women for 31 million people in the state of Texas.
It's a combination of all of those things. Certainly we are still in the middle of a recruiting crisis. It's harder and harder to get qualified individuals to apply to be in this job anymore. Our best recruiting tool is to steal officers from the neighboring agencies, from other agencies. But it's also the fact that, there was a time period where the total number of law enforcement officers in Texas actually dropped while the population increased by over 5 million. And I think if we look back over the last, 25, 30 years, when the population of Texas has gone from 17 million to 31 million, the total number of cops has remained just about stagnant. It's gone down and up, but it's almost the same as it was 25 or 30 years ago. Our state, our county, and our state, and our municipal governments have preached and preached: do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, and that's what law enforcement's been trying to do.
That's definitely occurred at the state level. If you look at our pension system, a big part of the problem with our solvency of our pension is we just have, many fewer state employees working today than we did 25 years ago.
Wow.
Look at Houston. We have the same number of officers today that we had in 1998. That's a fact.
It's so that we say the same thing in Dallas. I mean, when I came on, it's like the same amount of officers, and that was in 1995. I mean, we're gone nowhere.
Yeah. Well, we have a study that was done in 98, and we have almost to the count the same number of officers today, with about 500,000 more people in incorporated parts of Houston, not including the unincorporated parts of Houston, Harris County.
With a new study that says you need 2,000 more to do the job.
Yeah. And that scares legislators to death when my director sits down and tells the legislature that we need another 3,000 troopers just to maintain the population and what that cost is. So instead of funding those troopers, they just make us work mandatory overtime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, y'all.
Same here.
And that's what I'm trying to understand. And Lord knows, we don't have money trees in the backyard and everything else going on with that as well. But if we're honestly trying to fix this issue, and Fred, this kind of goes with what Steve was going back and forth to you about. We need to have, and I know I've heard the studies from people about the DARE program and everything else. That really made a difference when I was a kid. DARE made a difference. It made a difference knowing who Officer Griffin was, Officer Perry, those people were there as well. Coaching the kids in the soccer leagues, baseball, basketball, you get to know these people. But you got to know them, because I know how powerful it is for me when I go into a school, particularly, let's talk about O.D. White High School in Fort Worth, Texas, right there. Where me being a Black male attorney, how big of a difference it's made on recruitment and getting people who can think, oh, wow, I can do this. I didn't even think about that. And so if you're able to do the same thing with law enforcement from early age, wow, okay, I can really do this. I can make a difference right here. Same thing, serving the military, serving state troopers, etc. You have those folks over there with that. You start that in their minds and percolating, because I wonder, that becomes an interesting question. One of the things that we feel like the reason why there's a deficit regarding teachers of color in general is because, in our community, we're busy telling people to be doctors, lawyers, everything else over here with that as well. How many times do we tell them to be teachers? Few and far between. And I know that Apple has put millions of dollars into pay to actually a fund to actually recruit and get young Black men to become teachers and teach in these schools and at-risk schools.
Let me back you up, Rudy. I'm sorry. I want to back you up to the whole DARE analogy, though, because I think that's key, and it goes back to what both Frederick and Doug and Travis have all said. I was a DARE instructor. I was a DARE officer for years when I was down in Seabrook. DARE was effective to the extent that it gave us a little more time to work with those kids. It gave us an extra year. Kids who went through the DARE program had an extra year before they had to make that choice about getting involved in drugs or getting involved in gangs. But once that year was up, the percentages leveled out. The percentages became the same yet again. So the DARE program could not be left as a standalone program. It had to be part of an overall community commitment toward the programs that these guys are talking about. And we have never, ever, we've tried to do programs like DARE. We've never committed to a true philosophy of community policing. Community policing is not a program. It's not a division. It's not a section of the department. It is a way of life. It's a temper of will. And we've never truly put the resources toward that would have to. If we had, Dallas would have another 500 or 750 officers on the streets today. Houston would have 2,000 more officers on the streets today. We've never committed to it.
So if the state somehow, some way found a pot of money to help fund, and you guys just told me to help
By the
fund.
way, I thought we did have money trees in Pflugerville. That's why I moved here. What are you telling me, man?
Ixnay in front of mixed company A about the money trees there. But if we did, Doug, like say, okay, you're down 2,000 officers. If they were able to do that, would we be able to get 2,000 officers, 2,000 qualified people to get in those positions? That's what I would ask you. Would we have those FTEs full? Or would we still have the same issue because we're having people who are apprehensive about getting into law enforcement? Like if we just said, hey, listen, here you go. Here's the money. Can we get those? Do you think in your opinion we can get those folks?
We could, but it would take time. That's the hardest part about it. Just like we've been discussing around here, the mayor's done a great job with giving us 5 classes for this year. the max our academy can do is probably 6 a year. And that would be pushing it. And now with COVID, it's kind of set everything back because you can't have that many people in the same room together. So our academy class is having to split up. And it is a nightmare right now. It would take us easily 10 years just to get 500 extra people if I had to guess.
Wow. Wow.
By the way, I got to point out, guys, we are way over time here.
I was going to say, I've got another call coming.
Yeah, no, same.
Okay.
I think we want to pick up right here next week when we start back up. I think this has been a very good conversation, and there's still a lot more I want to talk about. Rudy, by the way, that study that you sent me from the Harvard professor several months ago, I'd love to compare and contrast that information to what the AG's office has put out, because I think there's a great conversation to be had right there.
Awesome. Good deal.
Yep.
That's good.
So
Well, thank you all. Y'all have a great day.
next week.
Everybody else.
Bye, guys.
All right, yeah, y'all too. Thank you.
And
so
if I
much.
didn't say it already, Rec Tech.
There you
Oh,
go.
man.
Rec Tech.